4.16 about pure tone audiometry. Pure tone audiometry, most commonly used test for evaluating auditory sensitivity, delivered primarily through air conduction and bone conduction, displayed on a graphic plot called audiogram. Audiogram represents a patient's ability to hear sounds compared with hearing sensitivity of a group of normal young adults. Air conduction testing measures the function of total hearing system, including external, middle, and inner ear. Hunson-Westlake ascending method. Sounds are initially presented well above threshold, decreased to a level of inaudibility in 10 to 15 decibel steps, and then increased in up 5 decibels and down 10 decibel steps until the single hearing level at which a response is obtained 3 times is reached. Because air conduction thresholds measures the acuity of the entire hearing system, when evaluated alone they provide little information regarding etiology of hearing loss and specific auditory pathology. When examined in conjunction with thresholds obtained by bone conduction testing, however, they help determine both the type and severity of hearing loss. Normal 0 to 25 decibel, more than 25 decibel, various levels of hearing loss. Bone conduction testing provide auditory threshold information when cochlea is stimulated more or less directly with stimuli by passing external and middle ear structures. Difference between thresholds obtained through air and bone conduction are used to determine the type of hearing loss. Normal hearing versus conduction loss versus sensory neural hearing loss, and the magnitude of conductive hearing loss if it exists. Conductive, when air conduction thresholds are elevated relative to normal bone conduction thresholds. Sensory neural, when air conduction and bone conduction thresholds indicate the same amount of hearing loss. Mixed, when air conduction thresholds are elevated relative to abnormal bone conduction thresholds. Speech testing, evaluation of listeners' ability to detect and recognize speech. Determination of speech detection threshold, speech reception threshold, and speech discrimination or recognition. SDT, indicative of the intensity level at which a listener can barely discern the presence of speech signal 50% of the time. Listener is not required to recognize the stimulus but is merely asked to acknowledge its presence. SRT requires listener to repeat the word that was presented. The SRT is usually 8 to 9 decibel higher than the SDT, whereas SDT usually coincides with the pure tone average. Pure tone average, an average of the pure tone thresholds obtained at 500,000 and 2000 Hz. Speech discrimination provides information regarding the listener's ability to recognize speech under well-controlled conditions. Monosyllabic words present in an open set format such as CIDW 22 word lists and NU6. Taped materials are optimal, but materials are often presented through live voice for rapidity and ease of administration. Speech discrimination materials are usually presented 50 decibels above the patient SRT, which should be well within their audible range. Masking. When conducting either pure tone or speech testing, a masking signal to the ear that is not being tested may be needed. If a sufficiently loud signal is presented to the test ear, it may cross the skull, where it will be perceived by the non-test ear, a phenomenon referred to as crossover. When this occurs, responses to air-conducted pure tones that have crossed over from poorer ear will actually shadow the thresholds of the better ear. Such shadow responses reflect the threshold levels of the better ear, elevated by amount of inter-auroral attenuation at each test frequency. Inter-auroral attenuation, reduction in sound when it crosses from one ear to the other.